there are approximately 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, representing 22% of the population of the earth. Currently, Christians represent 23% of the global population. I pointed out that when the Irish Republican Army sets off a bomb in Northern Ireland, we do not blame 1.2 billion Catholics. Islamophobia uses the stereotypic tactics of all prejudices. It holds up one group of bad actors and claims that they represent an entire segment of humanity. If you listen to Islamophobic rhetoric, which is emanating from many of our political candidates, and you remove the word Islam or Muslim and insert the word Jew or Christian or black or whatever oppressed group concerns you, it is difficult not to feel troubled. So then I dove into just some things that Islamophobic statements you might hear on the evening news. Christianity and Islam are entirely separate religions and have no connection with one another. The Rotary Club has a 4-way test, and the first test is it the truth? So that was the mantra for my afternoon dialogue. And so I asked, is it the truth? No, right? So I talked about the texts and the prophets of Islam. Prophet of Islam, Abraham. Prophet of Islam, Moses. Prophet of Islam, David. Prophet of Islam, Jesus. Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him. Get a step further. I talked about the connections between the Bible and the Quran. I explained that 2/3 of the Quran in their chapters refer to what Christians call the Bible. That Adam is mentioned 25 times. Moses is very popular, 136 mentions. Jesus is in 59 times. Now, you can quibble with the numbers. You can find other numbers on the internet, but you know what? I think these are roughly accurate. And then I pointed out that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that of all of God's prophets, he felt closest to Jesus, the son of Mary. I talked about the 5 pillars of Islam, comparing them to Christianity, because I said, okay, they have a statement of faith. There is no God but God. And they're like, well, they call him Allah. It's like, okay, Arabic for God. The Arabic Christians call God Allah. Shocking. And then I explained that they do these things they pray. This must be evil, right? I explained that I pray quite regularly when the trustees of Spalding University are inbound. I explained that they had this concept called charity. Isn't that wrong? But they have actually a more stringent form of charity, right? Christians usually think about tithing 10% of their income. For Muslims, it's 2.5% of your net worth. The Muslims fast. I pointed out that some Christians do heed to this thing called Lent. Now, the Muslims are a little more strict about it. They don't just give up chocolate. And then I explained that they make a pilgrimage to Mecca, and isn't that a horrible thing? And I said, okay, they're books like, maybe you've read the Canterbury Tales. I know they read the Canterbury Tales because they had to have their parents sign the permission slip, right? Which means there must be something racy in the book, which means they actually read it. And I said, it's about a pilgrimage. So then I moved on. Islamophobia Part 2. The Quran is an inherently violent text full of hate and cruelty. Is it the truth? There are 532 passages. Now this number, oh, by the way, these numbers are all in the catalog. They printed selections of this speech in the catalog, page 104 to page 106, somewhere around there. So you don't need to write these down. Violent passages in the Bible, 1,320. Skip through some of this. I talked about honor killings and that they actually originated in Judeo-Christian tradition, not in Islam. Islam tends to punish men and women equally. So I came to another section, Islamophobia Part 3. Islam oppresses and subjugates women. Is it the truth? Consider female heads of state in Islamic nations. The largest predominantly Muslim nation is Indonesia. It has been led by a woman. The second largest, Pakistan, has been led by a woman. The third largest, Bangladesh, has been led by a woman. The fourth largest, Turkey, has been led by a woman. Women have led in predominantly the Muslim nations of Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan, and Senegal. This one I hope will surprise even you. The number of women in national parliaments. The United States of America ranks 72nd out of about 150 nations on the percentage of women in their national legislatures. I can hear some of you reading ahead. 19.4% of Congress is female. We are behind Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. Okay, and then I talked a bit about women in education and really pointed out that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advocated educating men and women equally. He said the search for knowledge is a duty for every Muslim man and woman, and that when women are deprived of education, it is usually an economic issue. And in many of the countries, the economic subjugation of the United States and other colonizers is at play. But I will move past that. I will move past gender equity because I want to get to the next section. So then I left Islamophobia proper and went to the global war on terror. How many United States citizens have died? How many Muslims have died? So I wanted to run up the score on the U.S. side. So September 11th, I gave us 3,000 people. I found numbers on the internet and rounded up. The U.S. military, I rounded up to 7,000. I rounded up the contractors to 7,200, which was surprising to me. I added in another 7,000 for folks who may have died after they came home from drugs and other trauma. 87 were killed in acts of domestic terrorism, 350 killed as a result of terror overseas. That's all terror, not just Islamic terrorism, for a total of, I rounded up to 25,000. If you look at the United States official sources, they estimate that the war on terror has killed between 300 and 450,000 people. That's 10 to 1 if we trust our own sources. Neutral sources estimate that the death toll is between 1 and 2 million. Less neutral sources between 2 and 4 million. Hostile sources estimate more than 6 million. Now, I went to a neutral source that was the Physicians for Social Responsibility, Physicians for Global Survival, and an acronym that I can no longer remember, but the source is on my slide. Neutral sources estimate that 1 million people have been killed in Iraq, 220,000 in Afghanistan, 80,000 people in Pakistan. That comes up to a nice round total of 1.3 million. That's for every American killed by terror, the war on terror has killed 52 people, most of them Muslim. Terror in context. This was in my speech in December. I did not just add it for the NRA. During the time the 25,000 U.S. citizens were killed by terroristic acts, more than 400,000 died on U.S. soil in non-terror-related attacks involving firearms. That's a ratio of 1 to 16. September 11, 2001, equivalence. In Iraq, the war on terror has caused the equivalent of 333 September 11th. In Afghanistan, the war on terror has inflicted the equivalent of 73 September 11th attacks. In Pakistan, 26 September 11th attacks, inflicted not by them, by us. It is estimated that 90% of casualties in the global war on terror have been non-combatants. So if you take 1.3 million as the number who have been killed, that's 1,170,000 innocent people who weren't any threat to us at all, who have died in the global war on terror. So I got this from one of those disreputable sources. It's Forbes magazine, which estimates that we have spent $1.7 trillion on the war on terror. I call your attention to fiscal year 2008, when the U.S. economy was tanking. We spent $195 billion that year on the war on terror. That equates to $534 million a day on the war on terror. We've cut back $74 billion last year. That's $202 million a day. So then I needed to end my speech, and I'm 45 seconds over, so I better get on with that. And I thought I would turn to Dwight David Eisenhower for my end, because I needed a good Republican who isn't against our troops and I will let the gentleman behind the scenes turn on some audio for you.
Address of the President.
A burden of arms, draining the wealth and labor of all peoples. A wasting of strength that defies the American system or the Soviet system or any system to achieve true abundance and happiness for the peoples of this earth. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is, I repeat, the best way of life to be found on the road the world has been taking. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
So this end is just for you. We can't just talk to each other and think we're making progress. We've got to cross the street and talk to people who are not prepared to listen. So thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Nice to see you all again. So when we talk about, I'm a little bit speechless from this presentation. Thank you so much for that. It's really moving. In the United States, Muslims are less than 2% of the population. There's just no way we can make any progress without allies, without people who are going to speak with us and on behalf of us and to our neighbors. Connecting with people, I really believe, is the most effective way of overcoming the fear that people have of Muslims, but the numbers are very difficult, right? It's just really very difficult, which is one of the reasons why we need allies, we need friends, we need our neighbors to say, hey, I know a Muslim, and they're nothing like what you say. We live in a time, certainly, where there are no naive encounters between Americans and Muslims. I don't know if there ever were. I mean, as adults, we know that we spend our whole lives constructing and then deconstructing what we know. It seems like we grow up and we learn, and we learn so many things, and then we question them and start unlearning them, and it's just this constant process of trying to make some order of the world, and then realizing that our perspective's limited or wrong or skewed. And that's why I do agree with the Dalai Lama that it's so important that we understand our minds and we understand the way that our attention works, why we pay attention to some things and not others, how we make risk assessments, how it's very easy for us to be manipulated. And the reality is that we will always remember traumatic, upsetting, disturbing images. That's a survival mechanism for humanity. We could see 100 pictures of Muslim teenagers planting trees or Muslim families sitting and having dinner. We could even see the women being elected head of state. But we're not going to remember those images. We're going to remember the images we see of violence and trauma. I ask many audiences not only about heads of state, how many Muslim women have been heads of state, but how many Muslims have won the Nobel Peace Prize? It's a lot in the last dozen years. And just, there have been 3 women in the last dozen years. And many people remember Malala Yousafzai, and they remember her because she was the victim of violence. She's a person who was the victim of violence, but also, tremendously articulate, charming, advocate for education. But what about the other 2 women who weren't victims of violence? Tawakkul Karman, who led a non-violent, peaceful political revolution in Yemen, which is one of the most conservative, tribal Arab Muslim societies. And the pictures of her leading men and women, and her husband at home with the kids and bringing the kids down to her tent in the middle of the square where she was leading this peaceful revolution. I've yet to be in a general audience and had anyone say they remember her or know her. So we have this problem. We have a knowledge-based problem. We have a perception-based problem. That's not counting down, do I? Okay, all right. I started public speaking probably in the late 90s, regularly giving talks to civic organizations, churches, synagogues, and I really did notice the shift in about the mid-2000s, and it was during when the Iraq War really got going, when the occupation of Iraq and all the violence got going there, that audiences I encountered no longer had any sense of openness. Before, I would be invited and say, well, we don't really know that much about Islam. We don't really know anything about Islam and Muslims, so we'd like you to give a presentation. After about 2004, 2005, everyone in the audience was convinced that they knew what Islam was and what Muslims believe. And it was, I realized that I couldn't just give information because it was being filtered away from a very strong conviction that they knew what Islam and Muslims were, and it's even more so now. Now the case is, why is that? Again, is it something that's just been happened sort of passively? For many people, for many ordinary Americans, it's the water we're swimming in, right? And it's making people afraid and terrified. So terrified that when I was in the Flint airport a few weeks ago, and when you go to the airport, you have a certain amount of tension, like, oh, I'm gonna get there on time, and the TSA line, and and then you finally get to the gate and you relax, you're sitting there, okay. And as I just got in the gate area, and I relaxed, and I'm pulled out my phone, and I'm scrolling through my emails, and suddenly someone just came right in my face. This woman came in my face and said, "You're being brainwashed. You're being brainwashed. You don't have to wear that. You don't have to wear that." And I was just so shocked, and she was so frantic. She was so upset. She was so nervous. And I just, after I was shocked because it was really out of nowhere. And then I'm trying to say, okay, she's so upset. How do I relax her? And I said, no, what do I say? It's okay. So I'm trying to calm her down, and I stood up so I could talk to her, and she started running away, and I'm like, wait, don't run. Check my website out. ingridmattson.org, MATTS. I didn't, how am I going to, I felt so bad for her that she's walking around in this state of just fear. So it needs a lot of compassion, but it is a very difficult problem. And the question is, I think the answer is that why it's happening and why it will continue happening is in those numbers.
You only care about ours.
You know, it is. It's the number, but it's also the money. And they always say, follow the money. Why? I just want to, really, we just have to think. Sometimes it's just common sense. It's just basic common sense. Why did Glenn Beck write a book on Islam? What does Glenn Beck know about Islam? What did he get, you know? And why are people buying his book on Islam? Why would they consider him an authority on Islam? So here we've clearly got some people who are taking advantage of the situation for monetary gain. They're making a lot of money. There are people, we saw the money that's being spent on the war on terror. Some of those people, that probably doesn't even include the self-style experts and the people, if you go on Amazon and they claim to be experts on Islam and they're about how, selling books about how horrible Islam is. So there's a lot more money being made there. Think tanks popping up all over the place, strategic this and, you know, analytic critical this and security this and putting forth, packaging people to come and further this message that Muslims are scary, Muslims are terrifying, and they're not telling you the truth. And this is really the most insidious part of it. Because I've been told by audiences that I don't understand Islam. Just think about that for a minute. Or that I'm not telling the truth, right? And there is and I'm going to focus on this because it's really important and it's going around more and more, and it's something I heard, unfortunately, from someone with a religious education in a government-appointed position who, you know, even I always feel like I'm beyond being shocked, but then something else happens and I'm just shocked again, who said to me, okay, you've explained these things. You've written a book on the Quran where you've put the verses about war and peace in context, and you've explained to us certain things about, for example, the moral trajectory of the Quran, how most Muslims don't want to relive the 7th century, but we want to take the values, the principles. Of course, our ritual life is based on the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. But I mean, for the vast majority of us, except for those utopian fundamentalists, we're not interested in, you know, reproducing like some kind of weird, you know, play, the 7th century, right? We want to work towards the increasing liberation of humanity, etc. And he said to me, well, I have to ask you a question. How can we trust anything you say when we know that Muslims have a religious, what did he call it, like a religious precept that you're supposed to lie about your faith? And he said, it's called taqiyya. So they know nothing except for this thing. So this taqiyya means dissimulation or concealing. And so what he said, and this is an educated person in government position, saying that Muslims are concealing the truth about their religion behind this, which is then, if you look at imagery about Islam and Muslims, it's all about being hidden, right? So I mean, honestly, I'm so tired of voyeuristic metaphors: behind the veil, beneath the veil, unveiling, lifting the veil, peeking behind the veil. What's behind? You know, it's really just so overdone. But you'll see the images. It'll always be someone with a masked face, right? Someone. So we don't really know who these are, and this is a very significant, very old accusation about Muslims. So in the time I have, let me just tell you what this means. Muslims, if they are being tortured, if they are being at risk of having their life taken away, it is allowed for them to say, no, I'm not a Muslim. How do we know this? Where did this happen? I mentioned this morning about Ammar, Sumaya, and Yasir. Ammar and Sumaya, slaves in Mecca who were tortured unto death, Sumaya being sexually violated in the torture before being killed for being a believer in Mecca. Their son, Ammar, was tortured with them and watched this happen to his father and to his mother. And the torturers said to him, renounce your faith, renounce God, and we'll let you free. And the trauma and the terror of what was happening to him made him, at that point, renounce God. And he went to the Prophet Muhammad crying, weeping. He said, I've been ruined, absolutely ruined. And he explained what happened. And the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said, if they come to you again, say the same thing. Because God knows what's in your heart. And he was not in a state where he should lose his life in this horrible way for this. So, I think the beginning of perhaps a truly fascist state in the sense of, well, a totalitarian state in the modern world, I think the seeds of it really came in under the Inquisition in Spain. When it wasn't enough for the Jews and the Muslims to, under threat of force and persecution and torture or being banned, when they gave up their faith and they said, we're Christians, because the Inquisition said, no, they aren't really, and honed all of the instruments of torture and terror to try to find out what they really were. And is this how we'll find out who's a Muslim when we decide to ban Muslims from the United States? I don't know. But in that context, there were those, both Jews and Muslims, who concealed their faith, hoping that eventually they would be freed from this tyranny, freed from this oppression, and one day being free to have their faith. And the idea of the perfidious Jew, the Jew who is lying and sneaky, and the Muslim who conceals his or her faith and doesn't show you your true face, became a dominant trope in Western literature that then continued to characterize who are these Semites until today. So that's the reality of the situation. And so this idea of don't trust the Muslim has very deep, insidious, and very disturbing roots in our culture, and we have to be extremely careful about it. I think I'm going to just end with that.
Good, thank you, thank you.
May peace and blessings be upon you all. I'm very grateful and honored to be in this space and to be with all of you for a second day, and more humbled and honored to be on the stage with Tori and teachers and luminary leaders in the Muslim American community, some of the people that are the most highly esteemed in our community. So I want you to know whose space you are sharing. So I'm grateful to be here. So I'm not a theologian or a scholar, as I told you yesterday, so I want to talk to you as an American Muslim, as an activist, and someone who works every single day in Muslim communities across the country, but more specifically in New York City. And I want to talk to you about now and what Islamophobia actually looks like, what Islamophobia means, and how it impacts your Muslim neighbors, your Muslim teachers, doctors, social workers, cab drivers, restaurant workers, Muslim children and school children across the country. We're living in very crazy times, and I think that it's important to hear the voices of those in the communities that are most directly impacted. And while I will share with you some difficult things, I will say for myself and for my Muslim sister and brother who are on the stage that we still are and will always be unapologetically Muslim in the United States of America. And I dare, thank you. And I personally have been reflecting a lot lately on kind of the rhetoric and the things that are happening around us, especially in the context of this election. And what's been interesting to me is I've been taunted by a lot of people. About a year ago, I said, look, everybody needs to wake up. This is dangerous rhetoric. We've seen it happen in other places before, and we can't just sit back and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's gonna be all right. And people said, do you think we in the United States of America will allow a man like this lead our country? Linda, you're crazy, like this is, what's wrong with you? I said, okay. So I was silenced up until about a few weeks ago, and I emerged again very confident to say, I told you so. And what was interesting for me is the past few months, people heard things like, we're going to register the Muslims in a database. And people were outraged. Not in our country, we would never do that. We're not gonna allow that to happen. Ban Muslims from coming to our country. Maybe we'll let in the Christian refugees, but not the Muslim ones. People said, Linda, that's just all talk. That's not something we do here in this country. We'll never allow that to happen. Patrol Muslim neighborhoods. What Muslim neighborhoods? Our Muslim neighbors live in all cities across the country. We don't patrol neighborhoods based on people's faith. We just don't do that in this country. Linda, we're never gonna let that happen. And I was watching people, and I was feeling good that people were outraged. I wanted to see the outrage, but I was waiting for the punchline, right? I was waiting for it. And I said, you're outraged because you have no idea that these are things that are already happening to Muslim communities across the country. So when people talk about registering the Muslims, in 2003 when the Immigration Naturalization Services changed over to become the Department of Homeland Security, this was in 2003, the US government started a program called Special Call-in Registration. The acronym was NSEERS, the National Security Exit and Entry Registration System. And what they did was they called on males over the age of 16 who were not US residents, who are here on visas, business visas, visitors visas, other types of immigration statuses that were permanent statuses. And they made a list of 29 countries of origin, all of whom were majority Arab and Muslim countries of origin. People were so scared, they didn't know what that meant. Did that mean that they were gonna round up these men away from their families, where they were gonna put them on camps, where they were gonna detain them? People had no idea what was gonna happen. So about 180,000 Muslim men in this country complied with this program. And about 10% of those law-abiding people, they hadn't done anything wrong, some of them may have overstayed a visa, were deported, were put on deportation proceedings. And the idea of the program was we were trying to find terrorists. We found 0 terrorists from this program, a waste of our taxpayer dollars to criminalize, to target, and to profile our neighbors just based on their national origin or perceived religion. When we talk about the patrolling of Muslim neighborhoods, I'm from New York City, and I come from a community that, based on leaked documents from the New York Police Department, continues to be under unwarranted surveillance. Our religious leaders, our 250 mosques, bookstores and cafes, our Muslim student associations. So when I hear people say that they're outraged and as if that we live in a country where bad things never happened, it really bothers me. It makes me feel like we're not operating from a place of reality. And I understand my history very clearly, that we live in a country that was, for some people, founded on religious freedom, but for others it was founded on the genocide of indigenous people, the slavery of black people, some of whom, about 25%, were Muslims. And we say we won't ban people from coming to this country, in a country where we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And in a country where young black men and women can be killed by law enforcement officials, where no one's held accountable. We live in a country where really horrible things have happened. And I ask people to understand that Islamophobia is just another ism on a long list of isms that have directly impacted people in very horrible ways. I think of my own children who are 17, 15, and 12 years old, children who only grew up in a post-9/11 America. They don't know what it feels like to be a Muslim before 9/11. They have no idea. They live in a country that all they know is that someone tells them that they don't belong here. that they're just not enough for this country, that the faith that they follow is the wrong faith. They live in a country that time and time again, their faith is labeled suspect. They live in a country where policies are made to criminalize them and target the communities that they love and live in. They live in a country where every time they turn on the primetime television or any news station, they see images of people who don't look like them, who are committing acts of violence, and someone's telling them that those people somehow are connected to them, where their religion, their prophet are vilified everywhere they look. They are living in a time where those vying for the highest office of this land are mulling their future in this country, where our children are uncertain about the place that they were born and raised in, the only country that they ever knew. This is all they know in this country. And these feelings are not new feelings. Muslim children are not the first children in this country to feel this way. And I connect our struggle to the struggle of our Japanese American sisters and brothers who have experienced a form of ism and phobia in much more horrible ways than we have. I remember recently I went to Ohio State University to do a lecture, and there was a question and answer portion, and a young Muslim brother, about 19 years old, stood up in this pretty diverse audience, and he said, "Sister Linda, I have a question to ask you." I said, "Go ahead, brother." He said, "I want to know, who lived in this country at the time of Japanese internment? Who were those Americans that allowed their Japanese neighbors and their children be hauled away to camps in this country? Who were those people? Who lived here?" And I don't know, sisters and brothers, if he was looking for an answer. I think he wanted to ask that question out loud. And when I left there, for days and days after, that question haunted me at night. And I too asked myself, who were those people who allowed that to happen to our American sisters and brothers on this US soil that was created for people to come and experience freedom and democracy? And American Muslim communities are genuinely afraid. Not because we live in a country where we're confident that we're going to be okay, where we live in a country where we've seen very bad things happen. The question for me here, when we think about Islamophobia, and I want to take it a step further, that Islamophobia really needs to be called anti-Muslim racism. Because this is not about, I'm not afraid of the individual, Glenn Beck's. I'm not afraid of the individuals on the street who tell me to go back to my country. That's part of the problem. But the bigger problem here is state-sponsored Islamophobia, the institutional, systemic racism against people who are Muslim and those to be perceived Muslim. And let's remember that our Sikh sisters and brothers who are not Muslim are probably more targets in this war against Islam or Muslims in the United States of America. And what has humbled me the most about the experiences of our community is our Sikh sisters and brothers who have never once said we are not Muslim. They have never, in this context, threw us under the bus and said we are not them. They consider themselves our sisters and brothers and those struggling against the racism and isms that are impacting our communities every day. And people say, how do we combat Islamophobia? How do we address Islamophobia? And for me, I think it's important to educate people about Islam. But for me, as an activist, it's more important for me for people to experience Islam. And the way I have tried, and I hope that that I'm pleasing my Lord in the process, is by allowing people to experience the justice and the compassion of Islam. And that has been in the formation of me and others that are like me, including Imam Zaid, Shakir, and Dr. Ingrid, and many other young people in the Muslim community who are at the forefront of major civil rights movements in this country right now, including Black Lives Matter, including climate justice, including fights against income inequality, and allowing people to experience that the reasons why we stand at those picket lines, the reasons why we are being arrested in civil disobedience is because our religion teaches us to do so. And I want to give you one quick story. In light of the murder of Eric Garner, a brother, a grandfather, a father in Staten Island who was choked by an NYPD police officer, I organized with a group in New York City called the Justice League NYC. It's a group of young people, some of whom are formerly incarcerated individuals, activists and artists and others. And these young people came to us and said, we want to do a march from New York City to Washington, D.C. I said, do you know that New York City is 250 miles away from Washington, D.C.? They said, we don't care. So we want to do something drastic. Maybe somebody will pay attention. So I'm going to make a long story short. I was the co-chair of the march, and we had to sleep every night somewhere, at a church, at a community center. And I hooked up with a mosque in Philadelphia, a beautiful mosque called Al Hidayah Center. And I welcomed these 100 marchers, many of whom were not Muslim. About 95% of them were not Muslim. And we went to this mosque, and the Imam came out of the masjid, and he welcomed them in. He said, peace be upon you. We welcome you. This is your home. They fed us. They housed us. They gave us a place to sleep. And about 11 o'clock at night, these young people came to knock on the sister section where we were sleeping. And they said, Sister Linda, where are the people at the mosque? I said, what do you mean? They said, where'd they go? I said, well, it's 11 o'clock at night. They went home probably to sleep with their families. They said, what do you mean? You mean to tell me that these people left some 100 strangers in this beautiful mosque and they just left us here? I said, do you remember what the Imam told you when you got here? He said, this is your home. This is a house of God. You are all the creations of God, which means that this is your home. So tonight, while these people are not at this mosque, this house is, or the security of this house is in your hands. The empowerment that these young people felt, some of whom have never set foot in a mosque before, locking the doors, sweeping outside, things that had nothing to do with us, that were there before we got there. And in the morning, about 5:30 in the morning, the Imam came back and he started doing the call to prayer that everyone heard on the loudspeakers. The kids came to me again and said, what is that sound? I said, that's a call to prayer. It's time for us, for the Muslims to get up and pray the morning prayer. And this young, maybe 17-year-old young man said, I never heard a sound so beautiful, so moving. I don't even understand what the guy is saying. And anyway, we left the mosque, and these young people were so moved by this experience. The Imam never explained to them the 5 pillars of Islam. He never sat them down and lectured them. They experienced love and compassion and these doors that opened at a mosque who told them that you are marching for the right cause, a cause that we support as Muslims. And that for them was enough to understand who and what Muslims were in America. And that for me is my process of what it looks like to combat Islamophobia in this country. And I'll say this, amidst all of these things that I told you today, I still find courage. I find courage in my community. I find courage in my faith. I find courage in allies and sisters and brothers of other faiths. And I sometimes think that the word that we have as Muslims and allies and what Tori has is not only is it courage, it definitely is courage, but it's also audacity. That we are so audacious, that have the audacity to believe that we have the power to make our country the greatest nation on earth, that we have the audacity to believe that we can welcome people here of all faiths, that we are all equal, that we are all deserving of dignity and respect, that we have the audacity to believe that Black lives matter, and that when Black life matters in this country, all of our lives will matter in this country. I have the audacity to believe in our collective power, that we can stand up against fascism and nativism and racism and Islamophobia and all the phobias that we know that unfortunately are diseases in our country. And I shared this quote with you yesterday as we think about what it looks like to fight against all this racism and Islamophobia and all these other really horrible things, the sexism and misogyny and patriarchy. I could go on here for another 30 minutes. As again, I leave you with this quote that really is so meaningful to me and how I approach my work in the movement and approach my work in social justice, by an Aboriginal woman in Australia named Leela Watson. And I want everyone to have it around your house and just remember this when you stand up courageously against tyranny and dictatorship and all these other really bad things. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together. I hope that we leave spaces like this united and steadfast and courageous. I hope that we leave here ready to organize like our lives depended on it, because for some of us, our lives do depend on it. Thank you very much.
Now we will hear some poetry from Anna Rohlater.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone. I'm actually here to share some poetry from Rumi, which has been translated by my beloved teacher and our local Sheikh Kabir Helminski, who led the Sufi practice this morning. And just want to thank our sisters and brothers for such an inspiring talk so far. So I hope this adds another dimension. I think Rumi speaks to the crucible aspect of Islamophobia in our time. That was the basis of the selections I made. Don't go, come near. Don't be faithless, be faithful. Find the antidote in the venom. Come to the root of yourself. Molded of clay, yet kneaded from the substance of certainty, a guard at the treasure of holy light. Come, return to the root of yourself. Once you get a hold of selflessness, you'll be dragged from your ego and freed from many traps. Come, return to the root of yourself. You are born from the children of God's creation, but you fixed your sight too low. How can you be happy? Come, return to the root of yourself. Though you are a talisman protecting a treasure, you are also the mine. Open your hidden eyes and come to the root of yourself. You were born from a ray of God's majesty and have the blessings of a good star. Why suffer at the hands of things that don't exist? Come, return to the root of yourself. And one more about a poem that I think sums up a very deep level of devotion. If you fall in love with me, I will mess you up. Cultivate little, or I will ruin you. If you make 200 homes like the bees do, I will make you homeless as a fly. If you intend to bewilder people, I will make you drunk and dazed. If you are a Mount Cough, I will set you in motion like a millstone and spin you like a wheel. And if you are a Plato or a Luqman in knowledge, I will turn you unlearned with a single look. You are in my hand like a dead bird, and I am a hunter. I'll make you a bait for the birds. If you are slumbering on a treasure like a serpent, I will make you writhe like a wounded snake. Whether you bring reason or not, I will make you the convincing proof in your reasoning. How long would you remain captive to this or that? If you come out of this, I will make you that. O shell, when you come to our ocean, I will make you a pearl maker, the mother of pearls. No sword would be able to cut your throat if I sacrifice you like Ishmael. You are like Abraham. Have no fear of fire. I will make 100 rose gardens from the fire. Hold on to our sleeve if your own sleeves are stained, so that I may make you a shirt shining like moonlight. I am the bird of paradise, and if I cast a shadow over your head, I'll make you the king of kings and a sultan. Take care, read less, keep silent, so that I may recite and make you a living Quran.
And now we will hear from Imam Zaid Shakir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, which means peace upon you and the mercy and blessings of God. Before starting, I guess I'm starting. I was reflecting on something that Dr. Mattson mentioned. When the lady was in her face, "You've been brainwashed." And then when Dr. Ingrid stood up, she's very intimidating when she stands up. And the lady ran away. Instead of, "Go to my website," I was thinking she should have yelled out, "You've been brainwashed." It's all good. So we've heard facts, and we've heard experiences and deep insights from both Tori, who's good at throwing things, and we've heard from my two oppressed Muslim sisters who aren't good at being oppressed. Perhaps that's why they're so powerful and moving. And may God bless all of them, all three. So I want to start again on a personal note, that many of the figures whose faces would adorn a Mount Rushmore of Islamophobes have described me as a stealth jihadist. No, seriously. As a violent extremist, as a, let me see on my notes, in case I missed something. Oh, a Sharia supremacist. A Sharia supremacist also. And, you know, the sad part about that, there are a lot of folks who would believe those characterizations, and on the basis of those characterizations would hate me. And the reason for that is ignorance and fear are probably the most fertile breeding grounds for hatred. And those who profit from hate are the merchants of ignorance. So I want to speak probably to the Tori's 6 friends who might be scattered about the audience. And I'm looking forward to my copy of Glenn Beck's book. Actually, I already have a copy. So who am I? You know, every time I go to Egypt, I become a Palestinian. They look at my name, Zaid Shakir, there is some Philistini. Like, that's a Palestinian name. So I try in my very best American English to convince them I'm not a Palestinian. I am not a Palestinian. Anta Philistini. No, I'm not a Palestinian. Listen, Babe Ruth hit 714 home runs. Would a Palestinian know that? You know, Hank Aaron broke his record with 755 home runs. Would a Palestinian know that? And Barry Bonds broke Hank Aaron's records, but no one wants to acknowledge it because he allegedly used steroids. Would a Palestinian know that? and they look at me and scratch their heads, anti-Philistinian. You're still a Palestinian. So I want to tell you, I am the grandson of Lorleen Spence and Richmond Whitaker of Harris County, Georgia. And all of their grandparents, my grandparents' grandparents were born into and lived their entire lives as slaves. And so that's on that side of the family. And I know the paternal grandfathers, Rich Eubanks and Will Spence. Rich Eubanks on my grandfather's side, hence his name, Richmond Whitaker, and Will Spence, hence my grandmother, Lorleen Spence. On my father's side, somewhere about 4 or 5 generations back, there's an Irishman. And I haven't been able to locate his records, but his last name was Mitchell. And he was the father of Matthew Mitchell, who was the father of John Mitchell, who was the father of Donald Mitchell, who was my father. So those are my roots as far as I can locate them. Now, there's mystery. I don't know that Irish, and I don't know Will Eubanks. I don't know Will Spence. I don't know anything about their lives other than their names and the names of their children and the names of their children's children. That's all I know about them. Their lives are clothed in mystery. But I'm sure, and I think epigenetics, something I was introduced to by another oppressed Muslim woman, a world-class geneticist by the name of Dr. Fatima Jackson, formerly of University of Maryland and University of North Carolina. Who's an amazing woman who fails and refuses to recognize her oppression. But she told me something about epigenetics and how trauma can be passed on genetically for 4 or 5 or 6 generations. And so I'm sure that a lot of what my ancestors experienced in mysterious ways affects who I am and what I do and what I stand for. At the end of the day, though, I refuse to accept or capitulate to the base caricature of myself that's presented by those individuals who never bothered to reach out to me, never have spoken to me, never even sent me a text message. They don't have your phone number. That's what you think. They're like Ma Bell. They know how to reach out and touch people. They prefer to do it via the internet in devious ways. But if they won't give me the courtesy of speaking to me, asking me what I really believe or think, I won't give them the courtesy of believing anything they say about me. We're in this season of graduations. Shift gears a little bit. And usually somewhere, somehow, it's trite to some, appropriate to others. Someone's going to hear "If" by Rudyard Kipling. He have take up the white man's burden. That's another poem. I like "If" though. And we most of us have memorized, we've heard it so much, the first line, if you can keep your head when all about you those are losing theirs and blaming it on you. Very appropriate for these times. But the next line I like more than the first one. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yet make allowance for their doubting too. Further on in the poem, he goes on to say, This is something both Linda and Dr. Mattson can relate to. So can I. If you can see the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, that's very appropriate in these days of Islamophobia. But in all seriousness, that line, it makes me stop. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yet make allowance for their doubting too. It's a personal challenge, and it makes me go back and consider maybe some things I've said in the past weren't said in the wisest way, the most appropriate way. Maybe they weren't said considering the sensitivities or the ignorance, which I've talked about, of those who might hear them. And perhaps, given the opportunity in the future, things could be worded better. That's a personal challenge. But our nation is also challenged. In these days and times of flawed and imperfect, America is challenged. Can it trust itself? Can it trust the course it's charted? Since events like Brown versus the Board of Education. Around that time, the lynching of Emmett Till and the circumstances around that gruesome murder and the consequences of it. The civil rights era ushered in to a certain extent by the heroic stand, or should we say the heroic seat taken by Rosa Parks. All of these events, and many, many others, other communities, the work of the likes of Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and others, have led us or pushed this country down a course. And that course is now challenged, perhaps more than at any other time in our recent history. Will the country trust itself, or will it doubt itself? Will it continue down the path towards greater inclusion, greater understanding, more justice, more opportunities for all? Or will it doubt that course and allow the ship of state, a fitting metaphor, to run aground and be torn apart on the reefs of bigotry, xenophobia, hatred, racism, all of those things that Linda mentioned, militarism, greed. These are the threats that we face today. And these threats constitute the skeleton that the putrid flesh of Islamophobia is draped over. As people of faith, we must lead the way forward. We must continue to trust in the course we've entered upon as a nation. If pragmatic politics is predicated on compromise, true religion is predicated on principle. We have to hold on to our principle. And saying that, I'm not just talking about Christian principles, or Jewish principles, or Buddhist principles. I'm talking about Muslim principles also. And this is something the architects of Islamophobia don't want the average American to know. As Tori mentioned, in those areas she was focusing on, there's so much in common. In terms of principles, Muslims believe that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. We believe, as our prophet reminded us, peace be upon him, that we should love for our brother and love for our sister what we love for ourselves. The Quran and the prophetic teachings emphasize that life is sanctified and murder is an abomination, and that love and charity are amongst the greatest of all virtues. In fact, we can't get into paradise if we don't have the ability to love. You will not enter paradise until you truly believe. لَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا. And you will not truly believe until you love one another. This is what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us. And some people would say, people like Tori's 6 friends, oh, that's loving your fellow Muslims. No, he didn't say love your fellow Muslims. He didn't teach us to just be merciful to our fellow Muslims. There's a lot more I wanted to say. I could scroll down for a couple minutes. I'll turn off the iPad and I'll say this in terms of loving and being merciful to those outside of our community. The Prophet Muhammad, he once said to, peace be upon him, a group of his assembled companions, that you will not enter paradise until you're merciful. لَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ حَتَّى تَرَاحَمُوا. Until you're merciful to each other. And they said, all of us are merciful, O Messenger of Allah. كُلُّنَا رَحِيمٌ. Ya Rasulallah. We're all merciful. He said, إِنَّهَا لَيْسَ بِرَحْمَةِ أَحَدُكُمْ صَاحِبًا. I'm not talking about the mercy one of you shows to those closest to you. The father, the parents to the children to the parents, the neighbors to the neighbors, the relatives to the relatives. I'm not talking about that. وَلَكِنَّهَا رَحْمَةُ الْعَامَّةِ رَحْمَةُ النَّاسِ. What I'm talking about is the mercy to the generality of people, the general public, the mercy to all of humanity. So there are people who are going to do what they do. There are warmongers out there, there are hate mongers out there, there are fear mongers out there. But if we do what people of faith have been inspired by their respective prophets or their respective teachers or their respective scriptures to do, we shall prevail. It might take time, but in the end, we shall prevail. Assalamu alaikum.
So I was going to ask this first question later on, but I'm going to start with this one because I'd like a little bit of audience participation. If you feel like you're knowledgeable enough about the subject of Islam that you could defend it at just an average dinner party conversation, raise your hand. And
Give yourselves a hand.
yeah. And so I want to ask our speakers today, for the folks who weren't able to raise their hand, what advice would you give them?
Get to know a Muslim.
I'd say it's really important to not impose a fundamentalist hermeneutic on the Quran, meaning that there are some Quranic fundamentalists in the sense of people who take scripture completely out of historical context, verses out of context, but the vast majority of Muslims interpret the Quran through a complex set of tools, understanding the history, the society, the relationship of verses to the exemplary behavior of the prophets. You do that with your own scripture. The vast majority of you do that with your own scripture, and that's what Muslims do as well.
It made me think about a correction I wanted to make to my own remarks. Originally, when I spoke to the Rotary Club, I only found like 300 passages in the Quran that were violent, and the Glenn Beck guy was like, it's 500! And then he tried to divide the number of words in the book and convince me that, and I just like, okay, enough. But those passages to come up with that number are all taken out of context. They're all taken out of the historical grounding, both in the reading of the Old and New Testaments and in the reading of the Quran. So you're taking the most cynical and sinister reading to get those passages to be violent. As Karen Armstrong wrote in the Charter for Compassion, that readings of Scripture that promote violence are she just said it more eloquently, are most often taken out of context.
Can I explain why I said get to know a Muslim? I want to explain this through a story. I'll try to be brief. I have a friend in suburban Indiana, Indianapolis rather, I'm sorry. Suburban Indianapolis, I won't say which suburb. And they're of South Asian origin. And their mother, the father's mother, came to visit from that South Asian country. And the family went to a Muslim conference, and the mother doesn't know English, so she stayed back. And when they came back, she was running out of the house with a pot of food. And they're like, where are you going? To the neighbors. We're exchanging dishes. And in their absence, she had gotten to know all of the neighbors. She couldn't speak English. And so they were communicating and they were exchanging food, and she was cooking for them. And she was just doing what she did at home, back home in her village. You know, everyone knows each other. They share dishes and food. And so she had broken down walls of misunderstanding, and that her English-speaking children and grandchildren couldn't do. They were shocked, like, oh, these are the neighbors. We say hi and bye, and that's it. And you're going into their houses, and you're bringing them food. And so if you get to know Muslims, you'll get to know that we have wonderful cuisine. Listen. Here in Louisville, I know, now, right or wrong, all of you, what do you call a person from Louisville? Not a slugger, a Louisvillian? Louisvillian. If it got so bad that they were running around, it's like putting M on Muslim shops, they'd pass over Safir's restaurant. I know it, because where else would you eat lunch at?
I'll just briefly add, I think oftentimes we get caught up in the defense, you know, I don't know enough, so I'm just going to be silent. And I think that's for me the fundamental problem, that because we don't feel like we're equipped, we allow people to say very hurtful and nasty things that we know in our hearts and don't believe that are true, but we don't think that we're prepared to defend ourselves. And I'm just asking you that I'm not asking anyone to be a theologian or to defend any specific tenets of Islam or any verses of the Quran, because I wouldn't be able to do that about the Bible or the Torah. I'll just be honest with you. But I know what I could do. I will never allow anyone to make anti-Semitic statements in front of me, or to be, a sexist or a homophobe or a racist in front of me. And I don't necessarily need the particulars of any faith or any particular knowledge. I just have my humanity. I have courage. And I think what we need in this room is I think it's just very simple. It's about finding your moral compass, your moral courage to stand up to someone and say, you know what? I don't like what you're saying. It sounds really hurtful. I have Muslim friends, or even if you don't have Muslim friends, the idea that we can't allow people to generalize any group of people and for us to be able to stand up and have the moral courage. And I think if more Americans in our country had the moral courage to stand up against these isms, we would not be in the situation that we are in.
So I've come prepared with lots of other questions, but I'd like to turn it over to the audience for at least one, and then I'll steal it back.
Right there.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. I'm from a little community in southeast Alabama, and I lead or facilitate an interfaith group that includes many religions, and we're thankful for that group. It's at about 5 years old. When we go back this Sunday, we will be celebrating at the local mosque that's going to be opening, and they've invited our whole group to come and celebrate with them as they open their mosque, and they thank us for standing with them at a city commission meeting, letting them know how they were valued and loved in our community. But our community is very conservative, and most doctor's office, lawyer's office, accountant's office, anywhere you go, you're going to be watching Fox News as you wait. These are people we love dearly. How do we tell the story of our interfaith group and the relationships we've made in that environment so that it doesn't put their community in any kind of danger of unwanted attention?
I think the most powerful tool that we all have is our own personal experiences and personal stories. I think that oftentimes we try to do things in an intellectual context, and I think that that's not what works for ordinary people. And I think being able to share your experiences in this interfaith group, and sometimes, believe it or not, just inviting people somewhere, saying, you know what, on Thursday night, we're going to go visit this mosque in Ramadan, and we're going to break fast with them. Want to come? And you wouldn't believe the people that you would assume wouldn't want to come might actually take you up on that invitation. And understanding that people's understanding is evolution. There's an evolution. Like I don't expect people to hate Muslims and then love us tomorrow. I think that it requires a longer opportunity of education, but really it's about you're the better messenger than I am. And I think your personal experience with Muslims are going to be able to enlighten others to say, wait a minute, you went to their mosque and nothing happened to you? Like you didn't get, kidnapped or tortured or anything? I mean, not that I think people think it's that bad, but you know what I mean? Like this, just being able to use your own personal experience and say, oh, they were wonderful, they were hospitable, we ate together, we did this together. People say, maybe I'll try that next time. So don't underestimate your power as an individual with your own personal stories and experiences.
I think also it's important to emphasize that at a certain point, you have to take risks, and at a certain point you can't hide. And that if the struggle of Muslims to overcome this current climate is going to be the next chapter in an ongoing series of struggles. And I share Linda's dislike for the term Islamophobia. And one of the reasons I do is that it tends to cut Muslims off from the struggles of others who have experienced racism and bigotry and violence and exclusion in American society. This is just the latest chapter in an unfortunately a book that's unfortunately much too large. And at a certain point, there are risks that have to be taken if we're going to educate and if we're going to begin to tell our own stories, and if we are going to go out there and fully engage with our communities. Dr. King, I'm sure, would have liked to have remained anonymous, or Medgar Evers, or Ida B. Wells, or any of these people who at great risk made the sacrifices necessary to advance the cause of their people. So it's not going to be any different for Muslims at a certain point.
I'm worried about opening the floor to any more questions. I think we're out of time. I'd like to give our panelists sort of a moment to wrap up with any final thoughts, if you have some.
It's important for us to be realistic, and resilience comes from many places, but one of the places is realism. People get very demoralized and disconnected from the political scene because they think that their salvation is in politics. It's not. Politics is what we need to organize power in our life, but it's not the Messiah. And when we look at our relationships, our community relationships, look, Muslims are like other human beings. There's really super Muslims and there's really annoying Muslims. Like, you are going to go, you know, and some of your interfaith work or some of your neighbors are going to be really annoying. They're going to be bad neighbors. Some of them aren't going to live up to their faith. You know, we all deal with that. So to the extent that Muslims should have rights as other human beings do and have the right to not be dehumanized. And it's really about dehumanization, saying that these people are so different. Everything they do is so different. And we use like these Arabic terms to describe everything they are. You know, what's that thing on your head? I say it's a scarf. Like it's just clothes. You know, like it's clothes, that's it. So we have to, as we go forward and build this, we have to be realistic about it. And with that realism, then I think we're going to have the resilience and the strength to go forth in the long run, because this is a long-term project of uplifting all of us and human dignity and equality.
Yeah, I say quickly, number one, just keep smiling. Muslims, I mean, if you're at an assembly like this of Muslims, what's wrong, Trump? And so I usually start talks recently, just say, everyone, take a moment to smile. I think it's like the bell, and people like everything just becomes refocused. And secondly, that whoever you are, and I also say this to Muslim audiences, you can't allow yourself to be dehumanized by what people are saying about you. You can't allow yourself to lose your sense of value and self-worth based on your relationship with nasty people and how they see you. Your self-worth, your value is based on your relationship with your Creator. And if you're right with God, you're right. And if you're right with God and you reflect that and radiate that through your life and your being, eventually you'll be right with the people. So just make sure you're right with God and keep smiling, and everything, sooner or later, there's some hard times ahead, we'll be all right.
I think what Dr. Ingrid said is right, that politics isn't everything, but I just can't help but feel like right now we're at a crossroads when it comes to politics and democracy in our country, and maybe I'm just a little paranoid. But I think one of the things that has been used to otherize Muslims is this idea of patriotism, right? So how can I be a American patriot if I criticize the American government? How can I be a patriot if I'm a Muslim? Like, as if my patriotism, or I can't be a patriot because of that. And I'm constantly, the Islamophobes say that I'm a lot of things, but one of the things that bothers me the most of all the really bad things they say about me is that I'm un-American, that I'm not a patriotic American. And I ask you all in this room to really reflect and redefine what patriotism is and what a patriot is. And I think for me, a patriot is someone who loves their country so much that we are willing to do everything that we can to make sure that we live in the greatest country on earth, and that we continue to push our country to be inclusive, to eradicate all forms of racism and systemic discrimination against any group of people. And I ask you that to believe that we live at a time where our morality as a country is hard to find. And I think that we have the responsibility to be the people and bring our hearts to bring back that moral compass for our fellow Americans, so that we don't get into those very hard times that Imam Zaid Shakir is talking about, because my children are very afraid of what those times could be. And our Muslim children in this country, that when you're talking about Islam, I want you to talk about the children who were born and raised here, who are second, third, fourth, maybe 10th generation Muslims, who believe that they belong here, that this is their country, that they our children deserve to go to public school and feel safe, that they deserve to walk in the streets and feel safe. So please think of our children when you are doing the work that you do, that you are in these circles, when you are with your congregations, that the Muslim children in this country are counting on you.
And the person in the room for whom I felt most compassion was a young man he's in the military, and he had just been called back up. And he had to watch that. And at the end of the talk, I pointed to the American flag, which was just right there. And I said, this flag means something to me. I rode across the ocean with this flag. We're supposed to be the good guys. I think we need Jonathan.
You have a card?